Welcome! Hop on the gangway and climb down this nautically themed podcast into the Silentworld, where we voyage through a range of topics on the relationship of humans with the Earth's waterways and oceans. And yes, we will keep the bad puns and dad jokes in steady supply.
We are your voyage crew, Renee
and Kate.
We are part of the Silentworld Foundation, a small and dedicated team exploring, supporting and promoting maritime archaeology, history, heritage and culture in Australasia. Currently in port on our island home, Australia, and we come to you from our darling city of Sydney.
This month, in light of Halloween, we started exploring some more supernatural elements of maritime culture.
Last time, we took a brief look at the representation of sea monsters on maps, using two examples from our own museum collection, dated to the 16th and 17th centuries. These terrors of the depths have captivated and held the human imagination for a long, long time. Today, we will be taking a much deeper dive into time and exploring a few of the Aboriginal and Pacific peoples' mythologies of the monsters in the waters.
So let's fetch our dive gear and go. Now, before we go any further, we would like to say that neither Renee nor myself speaks an Indigenous language, of which there are many dialects in Australia, but we will endeavour to pronounce all words as best we can.
Yeah, so please don't take our pronunciation as being the most correct way of saying these words, and apologies to native speakers for any mispronunciations. Please do reach out if you hear something mispronounced and let us know the correct way. We would actually really love to learn more. So let's take a look at the stories.
There are many Aboriginal or First Nations or Indigenous groups in Australia across a great many regions on our large island continent. The mythologies vary across regions and groups and are part of the people's experience, put into stories and handed down orally from generation to generation for tens of thousands of years. One of the most well-known creatures of this mythology across a number of different groups is a monster known as the Bunyip. Features of this monster, however, vary across the country, so surprisingly there is no one look for the Bunyip that we can describe to you. Some say it is dark and hairy, others say that it is feathered, and some say it has a long neck, and yet others report no neck at all. Some other descriptions give it tusks and flippers, but the information that is common across all stories is a loud booming call that can be heard far and wide. The Bunyip sleeps during the day, but comes out to prowl at night and hunt humans and other animals. It lives in or near bodies of water, which includes creeks, rivers, swamps, waterholes and billabongs. Remembering, of course, that billabong is an Indigenous word for what some listeners would know as an oxbow lake. Billabongs form when a river changes its course, cutting off a section and leaving behind a large body of water, similar to a lake. The term billabong comes from the Wiradjuri word billabang, which translates to lake. For the First Nations people of Australia, billabongs were an important water source. During the dry season, they often moved nearby to survive the harsh hot weather.
The origin of the Bunyip is also a topic of discussion. Bunyips are thought to have been part of the Aboriginal Dreamtime, where there were spirits of punishment. Some theories explore the possibility that the mythology of the Bunyip arose from the existence of Diprotodons. Now, Diprotodons are some of the more well-known members of the megafauna that inhabited Australia. Megafauna refers to large animals, some of which are actually extant, such as elephants, and others which went extinct thousands of years ago. To give you an idea of what a Diprotodon looks like, think of a wombat, but at the size of a hatchback, so quite large. The last of them went extinct about 20,000 years ago. Now, physical evidence discovered to date places Aboriginal people in Australia more than 60,000 years ago, so the Aboriginal people coexisted with megafauna for a long time. It would be no surprise that the stories passed down the generations include extremely large monstrous animals. However, in this case, the story doesn't seem to fit the bill because Diprotodons were actually herbivorous and would not really have been on the prowl for humans or other animals to feast upon.
Although there is no consensus on the creature's appearance, there have been many reported sightings, some of which may have been animals, and some which may have been a bit imaginary. These animals have been spotted mainly in the southeastern states of New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. In modern times, the highest concentration of sightings were in the 1930s, during the Great Depression. Quite a few of the sightings over the years have been attributed to seals making their way up rivers and getting quite far inland in the time of floods.
An article in the Land newspaper of 1918 says,
"The evidence appears to be accumulating in support of the theory of the legend of the Bunyip has been kept alive by the fact of seals finding their way inland in the time of flood. Writing to Mr. E. G. Austin upon this subject, Mr. Frank Mack of Narromine Station near Dubbo, New South Wales, says that about 10 years ago his daughter and other girls were bathing in the waterhole of the Macquarie, then only a chain of pools, when they saw an animal which they described as resembling a hairless calf moving along the bottom of the pool. The intention was to set the net and capture the creature, but before this could be done, a flood came down." On another occasion, Mr. Gardner was shooting over a large swamp about 3 to 4 foot in depth when an animal resembling a seal and the size of a large dog rose, billowing or barking near them. Mr. Mack mentions that at Megara on the Edwards River, he saw a creature very strongly resembling a seal slip from a log into the water as soon as he came into sight. A fencer on the station declared that he had frequently seen it. This is at least a thoroughly feasible explanation for the persistence of the myth of the Bunyip. Whatever the case, one thing is for sure, the story of the Bunyip almost certainly serves as a story to keep people safe by discouraging them from venturing into the wilderness and near bodies of water in the darkness, which can be treacherous at night and may also be congregating areas of nocturnal predators.
there are so many threads of legend to follow on aquatic monsters in Aboriginal folklore. It is so hard to decide which one to take up. We did, however, discover one that seemed a little closer to home, which we didn't know about before. The Hawkesbury River monster, or Mollywonk, that according to Aboriginal stories hunts women and children. We are currently working on a project associated with the river, and so this captured our attention. The fact that there are accounts of sightings in the local newspapers and active searches for it by hunters and cryptozoologists only captivated us further. Cryptozoologists are zoologists, so people who study animals, but people who study the animals that are cryptids, secret, so shy, secreted away, they keep to themselves. There's been very few sightings of them, that sort of thing.
So Bigfoot, Nessie, Bunyips and river monsters.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That
Cool.
sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Unlike Bunyips, there seems to be a consensus about what the Hawkesbury River monster actually looks like. We have Aboriginal rock art depicting the monster, which dates to 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. This depiction is reminiscent of a plesiosaur, an aquatic reptile common during the Jurassic, that went extinct as a result of the well-known asteroid impact-induced mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago. According to various reports, this riverine monster is up to 24 metres long, with 2 pairs of flippers, and a long serpentine neck, sounding a lot like the Aussie cousin of good old Nessie, the infamous Loch Ness Monster of Scotland. No one to date has managed to get a clear photo of the Hawkesbury River monster, but we find some reports well up to the early 20th century of a monster being spotted, causing cryptid investigators to flood in. An article in the Telegraph from the 11th of September 1924, but which originally appeared in the Adelaide Advertiser, paints the following picture. A simmer of excitement was caused along the upper Hawkesbury River recently. There were wild rumours of a Titanic Seahorse having been seen in the deep waterhole in the river, underneath the cliff known as the Terrace. I feel like something out of Franny Fisher.
Hey, it's sounding fine to me.
Okay. The strange denizen was widely discussed, and it was thought to be a brontosaur or a dinosaur. Over the weekend, the river was a mecca of small boys and several scores of motor cars loaded with investigators. So far, however, the denizen of the deep has been lying low, and no eyes other than those of its original discoverers have yet beheld it. The only authentic narrative comes from Mr. W.J. Riley. While walking along the terrace at midday, he says, we were attracted by something in the river, beneath in a deep hole, I would say about 20 feet deep. We looked down and saw an ugly thing.
Oh, well, that's a bit rude.
2 feet 6 inches to 3 feet in depth, with a length from 5 feet to 6 feet, and of a yellowish or sandy colour. Whether its skin was scaled or not, we could not see. It was moving around continuously, and though we watched for over 15 minutes, we could not get a good look at its head. It had a squarish-looking fishtail. Mr. Riley was of the opinion that escape from the confined waterhole was impossible. What this monster really is remains a mystery, however, and there have been reports of whales not taking the left turn at Albuquerque and ending up a bit lost in the Hawkesbury.
Yeah, well, let's see here. Just as I thought. I should have taken a left turn at Albuquerque. That was my very bad impression of Bugs Bunny. So, perhaps Ness's cuz from down under is simply another lost sea mammal combined with wondrous human imagination. And again, much like the bunyip, serves as a warning against the dangers associated with the banks and deep waters of the river.
Just wondering, has anyone spotted the Hawkesbury River monster after the floods back in March this year?
Probably down by the coast, if not in the open ocean by now. Poor sod. Speaking of whales, there is a legend of our close neighbours in New Zealand of a shape-shifting class of aquatic monsters called Atanifa. Atanifa appear in many Maori and Polynesian stories. They sometimes appear as whales, sometimes as sharks, other times as dragons, and sometimes as enchanted logs. Atanifa are a bit complicated because they can either be friend or foe. Although of the supernatural realm, they do appear as quite real and a part of the natural world around us. In some stories, they are protectors or kaitiaki of tribes and symbols of chiefs. But in others, they are monsters to be feared, capturing and eating humans. They seem to have come to New Zealand, or Aotearoa, with the ancestors of the Maori people, by accompanying the great canoes that made their way across the sea.
There are so many fantastic stories about all kinds of Atanifa. It is so difficult to choose which ones to share with you, but I think the one both Renee and I love the most is that of Pelorus Jack. Pelorus Jack was a dolphin that became well known for guiding ships safely through the treacherous French pass between D'Urville Island and the South Island in New Zealand from about 1888 to 1912. He guided all successfully, as far as we know, except for one ship, the SS Penguin, because someone on board that ship tried to shoot Jack in 1904.
Rude.
So rude. SS Penguin wrecked in the Cook Strait on the other side of the French Pass 5 years later in 1909, and I would like to think that the old dolphin had a long memory.
In the Maori stories, it is said that the great navigator Kupe, who is thought to have found New Zealand, put one of his own guardian Tanifa in Cook Strait to guide other canoes coming through. The name of this Tanifa was Tairangi, and it is believed that Pelorus Jack was actually the Tanifa Tairangi shifted into dolphin form, a rhesus dolphin specifically.
Jack would meet and bob up and down in front of ships, signalling them to follow, and would always guide them through safely, without an incident, like a trusted pilot. In instances where Atanifa were not friendly, we find stories unfolding in a similar fashion to those we know well from popular culture of damsels in distress and dragon-slaying heroes. We find a charm, a spell, for slaying the unfriendly Atanifa in Tiara, an encyclopedia of New Zealand which was taken from Maori mythology, a book by A.W. Reid which seems to have been given to the author as part of an oral account. And the spell goes like this. Take it away, Renee.
The monster, there! Vast as a rock he lies. How angrily his eyeballs glare, how flash his fiery eyes. Come sleep, let the slumberous spells be laid in depths below. Let sleep be as of night, like the great night, the long night, the sleep-bringing night. Sleep on, sleep on.
These creatures of the deep still play a role today, especially in matters of origin and identity of the Maori people, and the active belief in these creatures is ongoing in some communities.
We see some other treacherous monsters of the seas in the stories of our northeast neighbours in the Solomon Islands. The descriptions we find of one particular Mimi of the sea is reminiscent of the angry mer people in the Black Lake of Hogwarts, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire film. Visualize that.
The real-world equivalent known to the Solomon Islanders are the Adaro, a dangerous class of sea spirits and supernatural beings living in the Pacific that look like mermen, except with a horn that resembles a shark's fin and a spear like a swordfish on the head. The stories tell us that their origin is human. They are the evil half of a person's spirit, while the good half of a person's spirit moves on after the person's passing. The malevolent half stays behind, and it is said that this half lived in the sun and travelled to Earth on rainbows, although in some cases it is also said to have travelled in waterspouts. They seek to attack humans, especially fishermen on the ocean, by throwing a flying fish in the air at the fisherman's head, and given a strong enough throw may knock the fisherman out.
Oh, ouch. However, there is apparently a counter to this knockout.
Well, that's a relief.
You may recall we talked about the flying foxes last time.
Oh, the cutie pies.
So these are real creatures, these flying foxes, that have the wings of a bat with a furry body and a head that looks a bit foxy. Well, it is said that if one of these flying foxes is thrown into the water straight after the fisherman has been assaulted and knocked out, then the KO will be reversed and immunity granted to the victim for a short time. Well, probably so they can get to safety, I suppose, and not be knocked out by another flying fish thrown at their head.
Certainly an imaginative way to protect the fisherman, because I don't know how often you would have one of those on your fishing boat, just ready in case a fish was thrown at the fisherman's head.
Indeed. And how do you throw it into the water? Do you knock it out, or is it still alive? Do you lob it? Do you peg it? So I think we need a bit more instruction on this methodology.
Please do let us know if we're visualizing this wrong. We would love to get to the bottom of this. While we are on the subject of good and bad spirits and fish on the attack, we also learnt of a Papua New Guinean legend of a monstrous catfish that attacks any human who comes close to her reef. And the catfish is described as a female and given the name, please excuse the pronunciation, of Perio. Her pronouns are she and her. The story goes that initially she was an evil spirit who one day was attacked by butterflies. The butterflies settled thickly on her and would not budge, so in frustration she plunged into the water to rid herself of them, and then turned into a catfish, while the butterflies that had been clinging to her became hard and spiny, and were transformed themselves into brightly coloured stonefish and catfish. She is described as having spines on her back, and uses these spines to attack boats. It is also said that her spines are so strong that they can cut a canoe in half.
That's full on. That's one big, mean catfish. I think it is clear that much of the mythology of these places and people, these stories, aim to explain the world these people are seeing around them, like the origin of the stonefish and catfish coming from the butterflies and the evil female spirit and other creatures of the seas as well, but also to warn against potential dangers of the oceans and waterways, and in some instances also to entertain and educate.
All of it is steeped in centuries worth of heritage and oral history. It carries an essence of these cultures and grounds them in origin stories, such as the travelling Polynesian ancestors of the Maori people.
While doing the research for this episode, I found that there is such a depth and breadth to the Indigenous cultures here in our region that I cannot pretend to understand or even imagine. This, of course, includes the Aboriginal heritage and culture. I was born in Sydney, and Australia is my home. This city is my home. I know that researching these few stories is not even the tip of the iceberg. That is the rich culture of First Nations peoples here in Australasia, but it has been personally a wonderful experience to become acquainted with these ancient stories of my island home, and I really hope to continue exploring that in future.
I too really hope that we can explore some more First Nations and Indigenous stories in the future, and I also hope, honestly, that our pronunciations get a little bit better.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We have explored a tiny sliver of some of the more ancient stories of sea monsters in our region, but the stories do not end there, and as we saw in our previous episode, these stories continue well into the later centuries and end up looking quite spectacular on intricate maps worthy of display. All those little leviathans and weird sea creatures hiding away on corners of maps that, just to the modern viewer, look quite extraordinary.
And hanging by the beach that is Australia.
Maybe we should just rename it The Beach.
The beach, I think so. I would vote for that.
Thank you for taking this journey with us through some of the more intriguing stories in our region.
Give us a follow on any of our platforms to keep up to date with our shenanigans. Silentworld Foundation is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also learn more about our work here at the Foundation through our website at silentworldfoundation.org.au. We will be back with another round of weird fireside stories from the aquatic realm soon. Until then, we wish you well. Or, as our New Zealand neighbours would say, kia ora. And as the Gadigal and Darug people Sydney would say, didjurugura yano. Into the Silent World is a Silentworld Foundation production, hosted by Kate Pentecost and Renee Maliaros. Thank you to the Mutineers, Sydney's leading pirate band, for performing and recording our catchy tavern theme songs.
If you want to find out more about bunyips and other monsters of myths and local folklore, be sure to take a gander at the episode notes on our website.